Today, we are exploring the terrifying reality of a man who didn't just hide his dark side, but actively built this incredibly effective mask of charm, intelligence, and normalcy. And he did it because he knew, without a doubt, it was the absolute ultimate weapon to get away with the unthinkable.
Just listen to this for a second. He was never a stranger lurking in the dark. He was the man who asked for help. I mean, that perfectly captures the terrifying essence of Ted Bundy. He literally weaponized the social contract of trust. Think about it. From a very young age, we're all taught to be wary of the scary figure hiding in the shadows. But what happens when the threat is an attractive, polite person just asking you for a simple favor in broad daylight? He managed to hide in plain sight by using our own innate empathy right against us.
The sheer scale of this deception is honestly staggering. On one hand, you have the mask, a psychology student, a crisis hotline worker, a future lawyer. This is a guy society inherently trusts, right? But then you have the reality, a man who ultimately confessed to killing over 30 women across 7 states, and investigators actually believe the real number is much, much higher. This stark juxtaposition is exactly why this case is so infamous. He constructed his outward perfection completely intentionally, feeding his own narcissistic ego while making sure his crimes were essentially undetectable.
Section 1. Building the facade.
So by every outward measure, he was building a really promising life. Born in 1946, he was raised primarily in Tacoma, Washington, and eventually went on to study psychology at the University of Washington. And here's a pretty disturbing fact for you. He actually changed his major a few times before settling on psychology, meaning he was literally studying the human mind to better learn how to manipulate people. Astonishingly, he even worked at a crisis hotline. His coworkers there remembered him as caring and just incredibly easy to talk to. Add to that his active involvement in local Republican politics and a longtime girlfriend, and you have to ask, why did he do all of this? Well, because building a pristine, respectable reputation wasn't just a life choice. It was the ultimate alibi.
But while he was maintaining this flawlessly constructed facade, a very dark reality was unfolding just beneath the surface. By the early 1970s, young women, mostly college students with long hair parted in the middle, began vanishing across the Pacific Northwest without any explanation whatsoever. And because of that meticulously built alibi we just talked about, absolutely no one connected these terrifying disappearances to the friendly, handsome young law student.
Which brings us to Section 2, hiding in plain sight. His hunting routine was practically a masterclass in psychological manipulation. First, he'd fake an injury, often wearing an arm sling or a cast. Next came the request. He would politely approach young women and ask for help carrying books or, say, loading something into his car. Finally, he'd exploit their trust, often striking in crowded public or semi-public places. He did this because he knew human beings are hardwired to help the vulnerable. He didn't look like a threat at all. He looked exactly like someone who genuinely needed a hand. And this next detail brilliantly illustrates just how incredibly bold he was. In July 1974, at Lake Sammamish State Park, picture a crowded, busy summer day. Literally hundreds of witnesses are around. In broad daylight, he approached at least 2 different women using that exact same ruse, asking for help with a sailboat he claimed was on his car. He successfully lured both women away, and they completely vanished that very same afternoon. It totally stunned investigators. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. His mask made him practically invisible, right in the middle of a crowd of hundreds. Let's move into Section 3, exploiting the gaps. The disappearances obviously didn't stop. In fact, they tracked his every single move. In 1974, women began disappearing in Washington and Oregon. Then, in late 1974, he moves to Utah to attend law school. Almost immediately, women start vanishing in Utah. By 1975, the murders spread to Colorado and Idaho. The pattern remained chillingly consistent. Young women approached with a polite ruse, taken from public places, and later found in remote, wooded areas. Now, this is the true tragedy of the whole case. Washington, Utah, and Colorado, all of these isolated local police departments were working the exact same kind of case, hunting the exact same man, and they had absolutely no idea. Why? Because this was an era way before national criminal databases connected local police. It's this terrible, dramatic irony. Law enforcement agencies were out there looking for a raving, chaotic monster, and because they couldn't share data, they just kept missing the polite law student who was easily crossing state lines. The turning point finally came from a completely routine traffic stop. In 1975, a Utah Highway Patrol officer pulled him over. Inside his car, they found a crowbar, handcuffs, a ski mask, and a few other highly suspicious items. Now, while it wasn't quite enough to charge him with murder right then and there, it was enough to arrest him for possession of burglary tools. Crucially, this seemingly minor arrest put his name and photograph into the system, which finally allowed witnesses from those earlier Washington cases to identify him. You'd think the story ends there, right? Actually, scratch that. The mask of the intelligent law student had one more terrifying use. Because the justice system still treated him like a respectable, educated citizen, he was allowed to act as his own attorney during a pretrial hearing in Colorado in June 1977. This gave him access to the courthouse law library, where he promptly jumped right out of a second-story window, evading capture for 6 days. Then, just 6 months later, in December 1977, he escaped again. This time he carved a hole in his Colorado jail ceiling, hid it by rearranging his cell, and actually lost over 30 pounds just to fit through the gap. He fled all the way to Florida, demonstrating this sheer, terrifying dedication to evading custody. Section 4. The mask finally cracks. Once he reached Florida, his whole calculated approach completely fell apart. In January 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University right in the middle of the night. Unlike his earlier, highly controlled ruses where he used his charm to lure victims, this was a frenzied, incredibly violent attack on 4 young women in a matter of minutes, killing 2 of them. He attacked another student nearby that same night, and weeks later, abducted a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly Leach. The facade hadn't just slipped at this point, it had shattered entirely. The monster was fully exposed. And that reckless spree led directly to his downfall. On February 15, 1978, a police officer in Pensacola, Florida, noticed a stolen Volkswagen driving suspiciously and pulled it over. Inside was Ted Bundy. His cross-country evasion and the calculated mask of charm he had relied on for so long had finally met its end. But the truly disturbing part is that his charm still managed to command an audience. During his 1979 trial for the Chi Omega murders, he acted as his own attorney again, using his law school training to cross-examine witnesses with this calm, chilling articulation. This was actually the first nationally televised trial in American history, and disturbingly, women were lining up outside the courthouse to watch him, sending him massive volumes of love letters throughout the proceedings. It really highlights the absolute absurdity and the terrifying power of his dark charisma, even when he was quite literally on trial for his life. And finally, Section 5, a permanent legacy. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to death. He was executed on January 24, 1989 at Florida State Prison, while crowds actually cheered and set off fireworks outside. Right before his death, he confessed to dozens of additional murders across multiple states. And that infamous final interview where he attempted to blame pornography for his crimes, well, psychologists and criminologists largely view that as just one last manipulative attempt to wear a mask, this time playing the mask of a victim of media influence, all just to shift the blame away from his own monstrous actions. But if there is a positive legacy to pull from all this tragedy, it's VCAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. This FBI national database was created directly in response to the massive communication failures in this specific case. It was the systemic solution to the mask problem. Now, isolated police departments finally had a specialized tool to share data, see the big picture, and actually recognize when they were hunting the exact same killer across state lines. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to reflect on. If evil doesn't always look like a monster, but rather the charming, polite person asking you for a simple favor, how do we learn to spot the mask before it's too late? It's a chilling reality that this case forces us to confront. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpack the source material today. I really hope this deep dive gave you a much clearer understanding of why dangerous predators build these masks and exactly how they can hide right in plain sight.